What am I doing? I'll tell you what I'm doing. I'm wrapping this cooking temperature probe, just the tip of it, in black tape. Because this probe is used for measuring temperature by contact. So you poke this into some food or immerse it in liquid and it measures the temperature by conduction. However, I want to measure the kind of ambient or radiated temperature with this thing. So I'm just going to wrap a little bit of black tape around it because, well, I'll show you what the purpose of all of this is, but we've got to go for a little walk. This plant down here with the very charming yellow flowers is lesser celandine. Now, I've mentioned in the past, in previous videos, that this spring flower is a little bit like a parabolic antenna. It faces the sun and it's got shiny petals and it creates a little warm spot for insects. So today we're just going to test if that actually makes a difference. So I've got my thermometer here with the black tape on it. And it's measuring, well, we'll just let it stabilise. It's in the sunlight already. So I'm just going to let it kind of stabilise. So we're measuring 20.1 degrees Celsius. And now I'm just going to put the tip of it in that flower there. And it's gone up to 20.7, 20.8, 9, 21 degrees, 21.2, 21.3, 4, 5, 6. It's a couple of degrees warmer inside that flower. 21.9. It's 2 degrees warmer inside that flower than it is if we're out here. So if I take it back out here, we're going to see that drop back down again. There it goes. It's going to take a little while because obviously we've warmed it up. But there we go. So there it goes back down again. It's not particularly responsive, this thermometer, so we will just go and repeat that experiment on another flower, if I can find another celandine. Actually, why don't we try it with primroses? The rooks in the tree above me, if you can hear that, that's the rooks. We've got a rook colony in our garden, a rookery. So it's still cold because it's early spring. And these insects, they don't have warm blood like humans do. And so they can generate a little bit of heat by buzzing their wings, for example. But that costs energy, that costs food. And so when they're visiting flowers, the flowers can reward them for the pollination service by creating a tiny little warm spot that will warm up the insect and enable it to function a bit better, because insects, if they get too cold, they can't fly. Anyway, we're down to 18 degrees, 17.9, 18 degrees. I'm just going to put the probe tip in that primrose flower there, and you can see it's gone up to 18.9, 19 degrees, 19.1, 2, 3, 4. Again, a couple of degrees warmer than just ambient. Anyway, each of these little celandine flowers is like a tiny satellite dish. And when the insect alights on it, which I've simulated with my little temperature probe wrapped in black tape, we can see that the temperature is just rising. It's a couple of degrees warmer just inside that flower than it is in the surrounding air. Let's try it with one of these purple anemones. So I've got 18.9. And when I put the probe there, it's going up. 19.5, 7. Again, a couple of degrees warmer inside that flower than it is just being out here in the surrounding air. We'll see that go back down again now. So yeah, just down here we've got a little solitary bee. I think that's a solitary bee. or some other flying insect is just resting on that flower. That's the general idea with these flowers, and you can see, I don't know how clear it is, but these petals are kind of, they've got a shimmer to them. They are reflective. And the flower itself is a dish shape, and it faces the sun. And same with this anemone here. You can see that one's turned to face the sun, and it's a little reflector dish that is concentrating the reflected rays of the sun on the reproductive parts of the flower. Now that's probably beneficial to the flower as well, because those reproductive parts of the flower probably operate better when they're a little bit warmer. So the whole relationship between the flying insects and the flowers is just a kind of virtuous cycle. It's a win-win thing where the flowers are feeding the insects are pollinating the flowers are warming the insect, because that's beneficial to the insect, but indirectly then that's beneficial to the plants, because that means the insect has got the ability to fly off to the next flower to transfer the pollen. This is the aftermath of Sunday dinner. So we had a roast dinner, roast chicken wings, big tray of roast vegetables, steamed cauliflower and peas. There was a little bit more than we could eat. I deliberately cooked more than we could eat for a couple of reasons. So it was an extra large cauliflower. So I thought, rather than just pick off the bit I need and cook that, I cooked the whole thing. So that's some cauliflower that wasn't even served on the table. That's just come back from the table. And because I was standing by the stove waiting for various things to cook, I made use of that slack time to make some cheese sauce. So I cooked the whole cauliflower. Those peas can go on there as well. So cheese sauce goes on the cauliflower now, and that will go in the fridge, and we'll have cauliflower cheese one day this week. It's Sunday at the moment. We'll probably have that Tuesday. So that will just cool down and then go straight in the fridge, covered up. Yeah, and that's a kind of ready-made Tuesday night dinner. We'll have that with some crusty bread, maybe a little bit of bacon or something like that on top before we bake that in the oven. So there we go, ready-made cauliflower cheese. And that really didn't take me any extra time to make, because I was standing here by the cooker anyway. And actually I've saved myself cooking the other half of that cauliflower. In case the cheese sauce looks a bit weird on camera, it's a Mornay sauce essentially, so butter and flour to make a roux, and then milk, and then cheese. But I used spelt flour instead of regular white wheat flour, and so it's got a little bit of kind of wholemeal vibe to it, but it's actually really nice. Got a kind of more nutty taste. So anyway, cauliflower cheese, there's Tuesday night's dinner. Then one sad little chicken wing. I could have just scoffed that at the table. I was tempted, but I'd already had what was probably enough. So we'll just pick the meat off of that and the crispy bits of skin, and that'll go in the fridge. And Jenny will probably make a little chicken sandwich or something, a little chicken and salad sandwich for lunch tomorrow. This bit here I think I can probably nibble a bit off. Bones in there. We're not done with those. Now these roast vegetables, there's a fair bit of leftover gravy. I deliberately overcated on the gravy. I made the gravy from deglazing the pan the chicken wings were roasted in. I'm not going to deglaze this pan that had the roast vegetables, because it's ended up a little bit burnt. I dressed the roast vegetables in orange juice, and that's kind of caramelised. Well, it's gone beyond caramel on a bit you can't quite see here. Anyway, got this dish here, and I'm just going to get these bits of roast vegetables. So sweet potato. That's not the easiest way to cut that up. That is. Regular old potato. Carrots. Right, this is celeriac. Celery root. A bit of parsnip. This is a purple sweet potato. I think I'll keep this out of this mix just because it'll seep into the gravy and make it a bit of a weird colour. So we'll do something else with that tomorrow. Maybe make purple bubble and squeak. So that's one of those. I think there's actually enough here to do a second one. So again, potatoes, celeriac, a couple of little bits of carrot, parsnip, sweet potato, all the stuff. I just divide it kind of approximately between those two dishes. Butter beans. And I'll drain off the liquid off of these. And about half of those in each one. Mix them in. And then this gravy, which is chicken gravy, about half of that in each one. And these two are just going to go straight in the freezer. Now, I wouldn't normally freeze canned beans like this, but, you know, I normally would put these in just before we cook, but I wanted to split this into 2 batches. So I am putting the beans in, and they will get a bit soft in the freezer, but I'm sure that'll be fine. So lid onto that, and then that's going to go in the freezer. And we'll take that out sometime, and there's an easy meal. We'll take that out, thaw it out the night before, put like a crumble topping on top, or maybe some scones, or probably not mashed potato because there's potato in it. So maybe like a crumble, a savoury crumble topping, or some little scones, or something like that. Anyway, so there we go. There's 2 more dinners kind of pre-catered, just from leftovers. And just so I don't forget what these are, purple sweet potato pieces. Don't know what we'll do with those yet, but I guarantee they won't go to waste. That can just go in the fridge too. But what about these chicken bones? So these are the bones from chicken wings, and lots of little crispy bits of skin on them actually, so lots of flavour there. We're going to make stock. And I also happen to have in the freezer another box of bones from some previous dinner. Looks like it was pork ribs maybe. And some deglaze from a pan in that as well. Still frozen solid, but it can go in the stock pot just like that. This is the vessel from my pressure cooker. In go the chicken bones. The frozen ones, I may just have to run that under the tap just to get it. Oh no, there we go. Into there, water. There we go, it's about 1.5 litres. And I'm not going to add salt. I could put some herbs in there, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to make plain, I was going to say chicken stock, but I think this is actually a mixture of different bones. So plain bone broth is what some people call it. That's going to go in the pressure cooker. It's got a stock setting. Yeah, like I say, not adding salt or anything like that because I like to keep my options open. I can do that when I actually use the stock. All right, so that goes in the pressure cooker. I'm running this on the hob here. The hob has completely cooled down and I'm not going to be using it again today. I'm putting the pressure cooker here because this is the best place to manage steam. The extractor fan is right here. So if I need to turn the extractor on to get rid of any steam that vents out of this, then I can do that. Anyway, it's got a stock program right there. And away we go. That has got an hour timer on it, but it takes about 2 hours total cycle for warm up and then depressurize. Right, so that's now finished, and all I'm going to do now is just strain it through this colander. So the bones from this, I did do an experiment last year where I ground them all up and put them in the vegetable patch to feed the courgette plants. I don't think it made any difference actually, so I won't be bothering with that this time. The bones from making stock like this are one of the very few items of actual food waste that we dispose of in our municipal food waste bin. Nearly everything else gets composted. You know, if it's vegetable trimmings, it gets composted. If it's actual food, I try not to waste it, so we use leftovers. Anyway, and there we go. So we got lovely golden chicken stock. When that's cooled down a bit, I'll portion it out, I'll freeze some, and I'll keep some for making soup tomorrow or something like that. So that was Sunday night's leftovers. Oh, I almost forgot. There was also this. This is the fat that rendered out of those chicken wings while we were roasting them. I think those chicken wings were actually corn-fed chicken. I noticed in Tesco that there were some like regular pink chicken wings, and there were some that looked a bit yellowish. And at first I thought, oh, maybe not pick them, but then I realised they were yellowish because they were corn-fed chickens. So it was a couple of quid for a pack of chicken wings that were corn-fed. They were delicious. That will not go to waste. That's liquid gold. And there will be some fat that solidifies on the top of this stock as well. I'll skim that off and we'll use it for roasting the next batch of potatoes probably. So I've come today to West Bay to have a look at the cliffs. Well, actually to have a look at the beach in front of the cliffs. So this visit is just a recce. So we have a plan to walk this bit of coast. We want to do that at low water, which it is at the moment actually. So at the moment it's low tide, and the reason for doing this, for wanting to do this at low tide, is that these cliffs, well, at high tide the water washes right up to them. So obviously you don't want to find yourself trapped up against the cliffs, but also these cliffs have a habit of falling down quite frequently. So what I want to do is walk it when we've got enough space to put a bit of distance between ourselves and the cliffs, so that we're at less risk of getting buried alive. So anyway, these are the West Bay cliffs. You can see it dips down there, and there's a place called Freshwater Bay, I think, where there's a holiday camp. And then that other set of cliffs you can see in the further distance there are the cliffs at Hive Beach. So the idea is sometime in the next few days we'll come back down here at the falling tide. At the moment we are at the point of low tide right now, so there isn't time to do the walk today. But anyway, we'll come down here on the falling tide, slog it all the way along this shore to that far set of cliffs, and then back somehow inland. That is the plan. But today is just a little recce really. We're going to have a little wander along here just to have a look, but we're not going to go the full distance today. So yeah, the purpose of today's visit was really just to see what kind of distance there is between the cliffs and the low tide mark, to see what kind of safety margin we've got. There is never a complete absence of risk, of course. So I think even if you're walking down here at the low tide line and a very large piece of cliff falls down, you still don't want to hang about. Certainly I wouldn't sit underneath the cliffs like you see people doing here. You can see there's a fairly fresh fall just over there, actually, where a big chunk of this cliff has fallen down, and it happens frequently. Maybe like 4 or 5 times a year a big chunk of this cliff comes down. That piece up there looks pretty ripe for falling. And sadly people do lose their lives here because, well, it just seems like, you know, all these loose rocks at the bottom of the cliff, people think that's a good place to sit and have a picnic. So I think we'll walk probably as far as this bit here where there's a recent cliff fall. So yeah, just looking up there I can see a big fissure running right down the cliff face. So there's a big piece there that is ripe for falling off at some point in the near future, and there are people sitting enjoying ice cream. Should I go and busybody and tell them they're not safe? Yeah, maybe, but it also seems like a recipe for a punch in the face. Anyway, it's a lovely day. Oh, hello. So yeah, this big slump here, you can see this has fallen down quite recently, because I can see a piece of grass there that's still growing, which has come from the turf at the top of the cliff. So yeah, that's fallen down in the last month or so, probably the last couple of weeks, I would imagine. And there are bits of this cliff where you can probably go a bit closer than others. For example, this bit here where there's been
a big fall, and it's now the cliff is kind of reclining, is safer to be underneath of than somewhere maybe further along where it's overhanging. So we can see an overhang here. That piece there, that weathered bit up there, is going to be one of the next few pieces to fall down. But yeah, you could spend all day here telling people they're not safe underneath the cliffs, and whilst you might save somebody's life, you'd probably also end up getting punched in the face a few times. There are warning signs when people enter the beach. People are aware of the fact that these cliffs fall down, but curiosity, something cat. Yeah, that piece there has got an undercut where the sea and the wind and the waves and the sand blown in the wind has carved it all away. You can see gulls nesting up the top there, but yeah, all these ledges sticking out are evidence of that piece being very weathered, and I can see vertical cracks in the cliff face, so that piece is going to come down sometime fairly soon. So anyway, yes, my assessment is at low tide, or at least on the falling tide, when there's a fair bit of tidal movement, there is sufficient space on the beach here to navigate this bit of coast without being at great risk from the cliffs. I mean, as I say, if a great big piece comes down, you could still be at risk because it'll go all the way to the water, but the further away you are, the more reaction time you have. Certainly if you're sitting down at the base of the cliffs, you have zero reaction time. So this is the harbour here at West Bay at low tide. We've not been down here when the tide is this low before, and there we go. Now, it is a particularly big tide today. There's a big tidal movement which you could see on the plot, which I'll put on screen right now. But yeah, there we go. And what's notable is actually the absence of boats. So all of the boats that were in the harbour are out, or perhaps tied up along this edge. Because often when you visit harbours, you see a whole load of boats that are very seldom used, but clearly this is a working harbour. All the boats are out because it's low tide, and I mean otherwise they would be beached on the sediment. I imagine mudlarking in there could be quite interesting, because this has been a working harbour for a long time. I imagine there are some interesting things to be found in that mud, but I imagine it's also a bit sinky, so perhaps not. So over the other side of the harbour now, and that's the mouth of the River Brit, which runs through Bridport. Now, when we first came here, I thought that the River Brit was the river that gave its name to the town of Bridport, but that's not actually true. And the story is actually quite a lot more interesting, but I'm not going to try and describe it all to you in this video. That's going to be in the other video, which will be linked in this card. But yeah, that's the River Brit, which runs through Bridport. Bridport is not named after the river. Anyway, that was our little recce visit to West Bay, just to check out the cliffs mostly. We're now going to go and get a coffee and maybe a slice of cake, and then home. There must be some gathering of bikers or something today, I think. Quite a lot of leather over there. Anyway, coffee, cake, home. So it's been over a month since I converted my last Windows machine to Linux, and just to update, it's going okay. So DaVinci Resolve is working okay in Linux. I've edited over a dozen videos now on my Linux machine, and that's all working okay. I've got my script that does my conversion of videos. If we just have a look at that, we'll have a look at it in this text editor. So I changed it
it was a great big piece of spaghetti code. I've created functions for the various different things that this script has to do. So this one is the one that processes video to transcode it, to work around the problem with AAC audio, which DaVinci Resolve doesn't support on Linux. So this transcodes the video files that I record on my consumer grade cameras to use PCM audio instead. This function's just for converting WebP images. So very often I find that if I go and get a product image for say a bottle of sauce or something like that from a manufacturer's website, their website will often give me a WebP image, which a lot of other applications don't use. So this little thing here uses WebP to convert it to PNG. This is just a little bit that moves things. So this will move files from one place to another, and this is one that archives the old things, which is slightly different to the above. I could combine these into one function that has a parameter for the target directory, but I just decided not to. And then these are all the function calls down here. So it processes videos and then it moves things in folders, and the folders are, so the input folder up here is just a series of folders where I put things. And actually, if we go into the screen folder, we'll see this is the video you're actually watching right now. So this is OBS here is recording directly into this folder. And then this script here, or these function calls in this script, will process video and move it into a date stamped folder. So these are the new date stamped folders here. And it will create these subfolders for main or GoPro or screen recordings, for example, if they're required. Only if they're required. And the reason this is better than what I was doing is I was creating these folders manually every month and having to remember to create a new folder, for example this one here, and putting subfolders in it. Because this script does this for me based on the date, this part of the script here makes the directory if it's required. So because it does that for me, I don't ever get this thing where at the start of March I put things in the February folder still. And also it means the naming is completely consistent across all of the folders, so these are always named exactly the same, no variation in capitals or anything like that, or where anything goes. All I have to do is put my source files into these folders. Some of these just get moved without any conversion at all. They just get moved into the right structure. But it's the easier way to do it actually is to put anything in here. So for example, this audio folder, if I fire up Audacity, if I'm recording something on this machine and then I go to save it, it's already set up so that it will save into that folder. So I don't want to save that project. So if we go into the input folder there now in audio, there's that one I've just created. So same thing with my screen capture. So if I capture a bit of screen and go to save that, it wants to save it into snips. So we'll save that there. And when we go into snips, it's there. And that means that when I run this script, all of those things that are in the input folders get converted if necessary and then put away regardless into the right folders in the right month folder here. So we'll just see how that works. I'm just going to comment out briefly the screen thing because I don't want it to try to convert the video you're actually watching right now, which is being recorded on OBS. So I'm just going to comment out those two bits down there, and then we'll run this script and see what it does. In fact, hang on. So we know there was something in snips and we're expecting it to turn up in this snips folder. So let's have a look and see if that happens. Run the terminal. There we go. So it's moved that thing from there. All it's done is move it, but that's dependent on what I've asked it to do down here. I'm just going to uncomment those lines now so I don't forget. So that's how I handle all my incoming media, and that keeps everything nice and tidy, and I rather like it. This is not a Linux specific thing. This is something I could have always done on Windows if I'd chosen to. I just didn't ever get around to it. It was the fact that I had to convert the video files that prompted me to start thinking of it this way. Everything else is fine, actually. Everything else is just, just works. And in fact, I think I spend less time thinking about the operating system now than I did when I was using Windows. The whole thing is just much more transparent. Most of the time, the fact that I'm using this OS instead of some other OS is just not even present in my thought process. And part of that's because Linux only does what you want it to. Windows was trying to do things like there were pop-ups with new features, pop-ups for Copilot, stuff like that was just intruding. Because Linux just does what you ask it to, I am less distracted by the operating system than I was when I was on Windows. And I say that as a lifelong Windows user. I've still got no grievous complaint against Windows, but my workflow is cleaner and less distracted on Linux than it ever was on Windows. So that's the state of play at the moment, and I'm really quite happy with how things are working out. I haven't had to do any real serious tinkering. I mean, I think the last bit of stuff I had to do in the terminal. Oh yeah, I had to run a thing called DMDE because I accidentally deleted some stuff off of an SD card before I'd copied it, so I had to do that to recover it. But yeah, the last thing I did was to install that WebP converter. It's not scary, and usually stuff that I do in the terminal, I'm just following a guide that somebody else created anyway, so it's not like you need to be a genius to do this. So there's nothing left in my migration to-do list now. It's all done. Well, actually, that's not true. At some point, the 0.5 terabyte SSD I've got in this machine has got a big chunk of it taken up by Windows here. And so at some point, I will, when I've decided I'm no longer using Windows, which I haven't, I think probably in the 6 weeks since I've migrated, I've booted back into Windows 5 or 6 times maybe, just to get a project. One of them was to get a project out of DaVinci Resolve. So there was this project here, which is not published yet, this was half done in the Windows version of DaVinci Resolve, and this is a brand new projects database here in Linux, so it wasn't just a case of opening it from here. I had to go into Windows, export that project in the Windows instance of DaVinci Resolve, save it somewhere, and then import it into the Linux instance of DaVinci Resolve. Really quite simple actually, but that was one of the times I've had to boot in, and it's been about 5 or 6 times I've had to do that in the 2 months or so since I migrated, and it's becoming less and less frequent. So at some point, when I've no longer any need to boot into Windows, I'll probably delete that partition. I've got a backup of it anyway, reclaim that bit of disk space. But apart from that, everything's going swimmingly. In fact, I've just remembered that what I need to do before I remove that. So at some point I will have to go into Windows. Before I delete the Windows partition, I will have to just release the license activation in the Windows instance so that I can reclaim that license as well. Apart from that, there isn't much else to talk about, so I will do some more of these updates over the next year or so, just if there's anything to talk about. So if you don't hear me talking about my Linux migration again for a long time, then I suppose the assumption is everything's just going swimmingly. So anyway, that's the state of play as at the 12th of March. Everything's pretty fine. Here's a fun thing. Not exactly weird stuff in a can. Heinz Beans Vindaloo. Now, I've tasted the other curry versions of this. This is a limited edition. I didn't even see this in the shops. It was there and it was gone. I had to pick this up on eBay, and I paid rather over the odds for it. I paid about £5 for this tin of beans, which is ridiculous really, but there was no other way. It seems like scalpers hoovered up all of these cans of beans. I've not seen this in the shops, but I am keen to try it because the other curry varieties were not particularly spicy. Vindaloo should be. And yeah, this is probably a collector's item as such, but what's the point of collecting it if you're not going to taste them? So, Heinz Vindaloo beans. These do look different to your regular beans. They are quite thick. The sauce is quite thick. I'm going to have a taste cold out of the can because this isn't weird stuff in a can, but that's what I always do. Oh, those are good. It's a really tangy, well-spiced curry. I mean, it's still not searing hot or anything like that, but it's got a little bit of heat to it. So we'll just warm those up and have them over some toast. There is also this can, peri peri, not curry, but it is fiery supposedly. So this has got 3 chilies on there. This has got 2. So this is supposed to be an indicator of heat. Anyway, we'll taste those in another video. I'm just going to go and warm these up. And I am going to have beans on toast, but it's going to be a toasted muffin. One of these Irwin's Ancient Grain muffins. So we'll just open that up like this. This is my preferred method for opening a muffin, just because when you do that, you get this rough surface that really crisps up nicely when it's toasted. More so than if you slice it. Muffins toasted. I will have a little bit of butter on these. Butter's freezing cold, so I'm just going to leave it on the warm muffins there to soften up while I continue heating the beans. I almost forgot to say, this is funny. Heinz beans vindaloo, hot heat, as opposed to cold heat, of course, with thrilling chili. I think you mean thrilly. Almost melted enough to spread now. The kitchen's a bit cold today because it's a cold day and the heating's off in the middle of the day. Made a bit of a lash job of that. Now this is interesting because these are definitely different. They're a lot thicker than your regular Heinz beans. So the sauce is just a lot less watery. And I'm going to have the whole can on my 2 muffins here because these are probably too spicy for Jenny, so look at that. It almost heats up on 2 muffins there without spilling over. So that's what we're dealing with. Time for a taste of these on toast, warmed. Well, I've only ever ordered vindaloo a couple of times in restaurants, and it seemed hotter than this. That might be down to my tolerance for chili at the time, but yeah, I would say that's about Dansak or Madras heat, not vindaloo. It is definitely the best of the bunch, which makes it even more of a shame that it's a limited edition. You know, if you're going to make something good, why stop making it? It's definitely the best of the bunch. Anyway, I'm going to go and sit at a table and eat this properly, the rest of this. But that was Heinz limited edition beans vindaloo. Time for the comment positivity section. You could think of this as the antithesis of reacting to hater comments. Anyway, let's crack on. So quite a mixed bag of comments this time. So quite a few people on the wild garlic video asked questions like this. Is that a statue or carving, or just a tree stump that looks like a bear on its hind legs, possibly pregnant? Also, I was really hoping you'd turn the camera and examine the wood carving at 9:50. I thought it was a kangaroo, but I'm not really sure. And interesting thing on the left that Jenny's walking past at 9:45, carving or naturally occurring stump or pareidolia. So yeah, that wood where we picked the wild garlic is dotted with sculptures. It's a woodland sculpture trail or something like that. So we've got to go back there at some point and pick some more wild garlic because the season's only just begun. So when I do that, I'll take you along and we'll spend a little more time examining those carvings in greater detail. Also on the wild garlic, somebody said wild arum is edible if prepared properly. The ethnobotanist Łukasz Wuszaj, I don't know if I probably made a bad job of pronouncing that. Sorry about that. Just put out a great video about it on YouTube. It seems to be most commonly eaten in villages in certain parts of Turkey and Syria. So I watched that video and it's really good. Obviously, it's a really rigorous video and he interviews people who know what they're talking about. And I'm interested in that because I've got loads of wild arum in the garden, and if it was edible, I'd be interested. But it turns out that to make it edible, they have to boil it for 3 hours. I think they change the water, all sorts of things like that. And even when they're finished, it's still a really sour and astringent dish. And so Obviously, they've got their reasons for eating it. I think it's linked to certain religious traditions as well, actually. So I think I'm going to give it a miss. Wild aram's a horribly toxic plant. It's got a lot of oxalic acid in it, or oxalates in it, and it's been likened to eating broken glass. And so, literally, it can make your mouth bleed. Fortunately, that means people don't tend to get fatally poisoned by it, because it's difficult to eat enough to do that, because it hurts to eat it. It causes blisters on the lips and tongue and bleeding of the mouth and so on, and intense pain. So fortunately, most people don't get as far as poisoning themselves fatally with it, but it still sounds like, yeah, I think I'm probably going to give it a miss. There are other things I can enjoy, and I'm going to leave that to the people who have got that as part of their tradition. But it's interesting to hear about it. Question about, I wonder if the tall, vigorous ramson leaves around the base of the tree had been fed with some kind of nitrogen-rich liquid. They'd be none the worse for it, I'm sure. So that did occur to me, that those ramsons plants that were right by the tree trunk and had grown quite a lot taller than their peers, it could be that a dog or a fox had peed on that tree and the nitrates in the urine were feeding the plants around the tree. But I have seen that quite a lot in places where it's off the trail, and it didn't look like a dog marking spot. When you're a dog owner, you kind of get the feel for what is a dog marking spot and what isn't. Dogs don't just wee on anything indiscriminately. They tend to pick things that stand out or stick up, marking posts. And so they don't just pee on every tree. It could be that still, though. Or it could be actually the excreta of small organisms living in the moss. So slugs and beetles and woodlice and microorganisms and maybe even fungi and things like that. They all excrete. And so those excreta could be running down the bark of the tree and into the soil and fertilizing the things around the tree and the tree itself. I don't think so, though. I have a different hypothesis. I think it's temperature, not nutrients, because those plants weren't just bigger, they were further along. They were further developed, so they had started earlier. And I think it's temperature. And I think maybe what's happening is the tree, as it's drawing its sap up from the roots, it's the ground temperature is going up into the trunk, and the trunk is maybe 1/4 of a degree warmer than the ambient temperature, and it's just warming those plants a little bit and causing them to grow as if they'd had bottom heat in a propagator or something. So I think it might be a temperature thing. There's an interesting bit of science to be done here if somebody hasn't already done it. So if anybody's looking for a research project, there is a really interesting thing, is why do plants, some bulbous plants especially, I've seen it with bluebells as well, at the base of trees grow earlier and more vigorously than the ones away from trees. I think the tree is almost like a ground source heat pump. So it's bringing the sap up from its roots in spring as the sap is rising. I think the trunk is slightly warmer, and the root system around the base of the tree is slightly warmer than the ambient temperature, and that's possibly warming those plants and just bringing them along a little bit earlier. It could also be water, because the tree is like a big funnel, so all of the rain that falls on the tree will tend to trickle down the branches and down the trunk, so the stuff at the base of the trunk might just be getting better watering than everything else. But it wasn't dry where we were, so there was no shortage of water anyway where we were. So I tend to think it's temperature. But yeah, interesting bit of research there for somebody to do. I don't think I'll get round to doing it, but if anybody's looking for a project, there's a thing you might want to try. This was on the West Bay coastal walk. Limpets and seaweed could be a tasty stew. I have eaten limpets before. So we saw, as we walked along past West Bay cliffs, there were huge limpets on the rocks. And I have eaten them before. It is like a snail. A limpet is basically a sea snail. So underneath that conical shell, there is what looks like just a sucker. But when you see them active, when they are covered with water and they start to move around, a little head pops out with antennae on it and a little tail comes out at the other end, and they slide around like snails. It is essentially a snail, but it just has a conical shell instead of a spiral one. And so they are edible in the same way that other sea snails like whelks and winkles are edible. But from my experience, limpets are actually really tough and chewy. And I think that's just because that foot muscle that pulls them so hard onto the rocks is a very well exercised muscle. And so having tried to eat them, They were chewy. It was like eating a piece of surgical tubing. It just, you chew and chew and chew, and it just never yields. They were very tasty, but there was no way of making them tender. I tried cooking them really quickly. I tried cooking them really slowly with wine and onions, and I tried all sorts of different things to see, and I couldn't ever make them tender. They were always chewy like rubber bands, which is a shame because they're tasty, but it also makes me feel a little bit guilty about the idea of eating them. I'm not a vegetarian or vegan, but I think I would feel a little bit guilty about killing an animal and then eating it and not enjoying it. Moving on, so this was on the spatula carving one. Nice work, Mike. Looks like you need a shed or workshop or man cave. I am actually thinking about making a covered area up in the corner of the garden. There's a little space where I could put like maybe a pergola with two sides and an open front, but a covered area so that we can sit under there and do a bit of carving. Maybe light a little fire in a brazier, do some outdoor cooking, those sorts of things. I'm not going to go full Jack Hargreaves in a shed with tools and things hanging behind me, not just yet anyway, but yeah, I think a little covered area that I could do, light a little fire, sit and tell stories, carve some spoons, do some other wild crafting, basket making for example. My basket making that I did in Advent would have been a lot more pleasant if I was sat by a fire and I was under cover. So yeah, that could be a project for this year. Things on the Linux and the workflow videos now. Somebody said, and this sounds like a hater comment, but it's not. It's an interesting question. Please tell me you also hate the sound of your own voice on video. Well, weirdly, I don't. And weirdly, my voice just sounds completely normal to me now. You know the thing you get where you listen to a recording of your voice and it doesn't sound like you think you sound like? If you don't do all of this recording stuff, sometimes a recording can sound very different to what you think you sound like, because when you hear your own voice in real life, you're hearing it through your head as well as through your ears. I don't get that anymore. I have kind of conditioned myself by listening to my voice so much in editing these videos that my voice coming out of my mouth now sounds the same as it does when I listen to it on a recording. So my perception has been somehow tuned to equate those two different, then they are probably different things, and now they just sound the same. So I sound like myself on a recording. Somebody said Linux Mint is a very nice OS for disenfranchised Windows users to switch to. And yeah, it is. Linux Mint is almost too nice. I've got 20 odd years of experience of administering Linux and installing Linux and using it on servers and machines I had on the side, and maybe not my main computing, but lots of machines along the side. And so as a relatively experienced Linux user, I kind of felt a little bit weird choosing Linux Mint because it is so easy. And I felt like I was maybe doing myself a disservice by choosing something that didn't really exploit my existing Linux skills. But in the end I thought, well, why not? It is actually, my editing machine is an appliance. I use it for my productive work. Why not just have a Linux installation that you just use? And Linux Mint is now at the state where, for a regular user who just wants to do web browsing, maybe some documents, maybe a bit of photo editing and stuff like that, you can use it without ever having to go into the terminal. It's possible, once it's set up, for a non-technical user to just use it as an appliance operating system, and it's rather uncomplicated. But I felt like I shouldn't be choosing that for some weird reason. But in the end I thought, well, why not? It's just a device. So I went with it, and there was a segment earlier in the video. It's just all completely normal. Still on the Linux. So I'm not going to read all of this comment, but this is somebody who said, Linux, I've been running for years as my primary OS. My primary complaints are just about everything you listed here in the video. So they use Critter, GIMP, Inkscape, Blender for their creative stuff. And they said, I would love a better vector program than Inkscape, as it's just a bit unstable on their machine. So I did mention in reply here about a program I found called Friction Graphics, which is a motion graphics animation suite based on a different piece of software called Envy, which is probably the best way to describe it is if you imagine if Inkscape had a timeline. That is Friction Graphics. It's a lot more than that actually, but it's a vector graphics program, so you draw things by creating shapes and defining the colors and properties of those shapes, but it's also got a timeline that has keyframing. So you can make those shapes move around, and it has object parenting, so you can link those shapes and make articulated objects and animate the articulation of those objects. So you can do character animation on it, you can do cartoon animation on it. It doesn't have all of the features of a true cartoon animation thing. It doesn't have inverse kinematics, so you can't do this thing where you move the hand around and the elbow and the shoulder do the thing they should. You would have to actually move that joint, move that joint, move that joint. So it has forward kinematics but not reverse kinematics. But you can still do character animation with that if you keep your characters simple. They didn't even want it for character animation, they just wanted it for stills, I think. But I really just wanted to shout out this Friction Graphics program because I had such trouble finding it. I was searching for years for an animation program that I could do simple cartoons and simple graphical animations with. And of course there are plenty of things out there if you want to pay for them. And Adobe Animate is probably the one that you would choose if you wanted to do a bit of animation and a bit of motion graphics and a bit of everything else. But I don't really want to get on the whole subscription with Adobe thing. And so it took me forever to find this Friction Graphics program. It's kind of hidden in plain sight, and so I felt like I wanted to shout that out. So if you're interested in vector graphics, if you're interested in simple animation, and you want a free bit of software to try out and do that, then try out Friction Graphics. I'll link it in the video description. It is, as I say, free, so nothing to lose by trying. Not sponsored, I'm just a fan. And then finally, somebody said, it occurred to me that a lot of your tips are, XYZ isn't great, but it's fine actually because of ABC. A lot of recipes or instructions that float around on social media focus on the best or the easiest way to achieve something. There ought to be more room for, no, it's fine actually, in all manner of things. Well, maybe this is just where I am in life generally, so it resonates with me. And somebody else said there is a depressing lack of nuance on the internet, and this is what this is about. So nuance on the internet. The internet is where nuance goes to die. And I do think it is a shame that the internet is this fantastic communication tool that we as a species have invented, and we're using it to tell people they're peeling their banana the wrong way. However, this is comment positivity, so we'll look at this from the other angle. Let's talk about the value of nuance, and also whether it's necessary to optimize every single thing you do. So I probably get more advice from people who think I should do things another way than most people do, because I get all of the comments on my channel. And don't get me wrong, I cherish those comments. I love that people interact with me in the comments, but I am probably exposed to more unsolicited advice than the average person. And I think sometimes some of that advice is coming from people who think I'm trying to optimize every part of my life, and I'm just not. And I don't think it's even a thing I would want to do, to optimize every part of my life. I don't want to get to the place I'm going as quick as possible. I sometimes want to take the scenic route. I don't necessarily even want to, for example, open a can the quickest and most efficient way. We are back at pull tab cans again. Sorry about this being an obsession of mine, or maybe yours. I don't find pull tab cans particularly comfortable to open, but even if I did, I'm not always looking for the most efficient and quickest way to do a thing. For me, there is a little bit of weird pleasure in the sound of the can opener and turning the handle, and it's just, sure, I could do it quicker and then move on and do something else, but here's the distilled question. If you're going to find a more efficient way to peel a carrot and save yourself 5 seconds on peeling a carrot, what do you intend to do with that 5 seconds? If you've got 1,000,000 carrots to peel, then maybe it's worth saving that much time. If not, is perhaps that moment where you're peeling a carrot, for example, is perhaps that moment not more valuable to just exist in? You know, you don't have to be doing just one thing. You can be thinking, or you can be emptying yourself of thoughts when you're peeling vegetables or opening cans or whatever it is, or doing anything that is less than optimal. You don't have to be rushing to the next experience necessarily all the time. At least I don't, anyway. I don't want to be rushing from one experience to another. I have a lot of experiences that I fill my life up with, partly for this channel and partly because that's the kind of person I am. But I don't necessarily want to be rushing from one place to another all the time. And I don't necessarily always want to take the most direct or fastest route to the end goal. I know it sounds a bit trite and cliche to say the journey is as important as the destination, but there is some truth in that. You know, if I'm going somewhere, for example, there is the direct route and there is the scenic coastal route or the scenic forest route or whatever. So if you have the time, maybe wasting a bit of the time in order to make that time enjoyable or calming or relaxing. I think that's my point, is that trying to optimize every single little thing turns life into a chore rather than a pleasure. So anyway, that's the end of the video. I hope that's been interesting. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.